Welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, the go-to construction podcast for construction professionals seeking inspiration, education, or motivation for the next steps in their career. Each Monday, you'll be joined by me, Mick Donaghy, Managing Director of Gedden Executive Recruitment and a respected name from the industry. A construction leader, a business owner, or someone in the thick of the action. The whole premise of this podcast is for you to get something from it. An idea, a connection, a mentor, whatever it is, I hope you get it. And I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Takeoff Podcast. Today we are joined by none other than Andrew Marsonet. Andrew is a seasoned construction professional with over 30 years of experience, specializing in major, complex and multifaceted infrastructure projects. With a track record of leadership spanning more than 15 years, Andrew has successfully managed the design and construction of significant legacy projects throughout Australia, demonstrating expertise in end-to-end construction management. Notable projects in Andrew's portfolio include the M2 motorway upgrade, Sydney Harbour Tunnel, New Southern Rail Tunnels, Pacific Highway upgrade, and the Bondi Turnback project. Currently working as a project director for Acciona on Western Harbour Tunnel, Andrew is known for his collaborative leadership style, fostering effectiveness in both project and operational management roles. Andrew, thank you so much for being part of the Takeoff Podcast. Do you mind giving yourself a bit of an introduction as to what it is that you do, who you are, and what you're focusing on at the moment?
Sure, Mick, and thank you. Look, right now I'm the project director for the Western Harbour Tunnel, which is the third major road crossing of Sydney Harbour. As project director, I'm responsible and accountable for all aspects of delivery of that project. We started here in late 2022, December of 2022, and our task is obviously to build a 3-lane dual carriageway tunnel connected into the West Connects Roselle Interchange at the south and the Warringah Freeway at the north. And we also have a couple of ramps that connect into the local network around North Sydney. So when it comes to what the project is all about, it's it's excavation of tunnelling. It's a slurry shield, large diameter slurry shield TBM across Sydney Harbour, but it's also the fit-out elements and the M&E elements, the operational management control system, the software that manages the tunnel and responds to any kind of incidents or fire and life safety issues. So there's a lot more than just excavation.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible projects, and I'd mentioned some of the my introduction there, some of the projects you've been involved with over the years. Andrew, do you mind taking me back to your early days and the effectively what sort of brought you into the infrastructure and construction industry?
Well, I think it goes back to my father, to be frank. My father was an Italian migrant who came to Australia in the mid-1950s, and he came to Australia as a cabinet maker and joiner. And I guess a lot of people say this about their parents, and being objective, he was quite a skilled craftsman. Mm-hmm. He worked well into his 70s creating furniture and doing different jobs. He actually had to move away from the family home because he couldn't retire. But when he came to Australia, there wasn't a great need for intricate bespoke furniture. So he got into building, and he worked in the Snowy Mountains in Australia building chalets. And then later on, he moved to the central coast of New South Wales, which is where I grew up. And there was a bit of a building boom. And as time went by, he started his own company, just a small partnership with another guy, and they were building spec homes and whatever. But invariably, my weekends and my school holidays were involved in putting frames up or being on the other end of the dumpy when my father was setting out the foundations, or cleaning the acid on the brickwork or cleaning the rubbish up. So I was in and around construction. And then my father got a number of contracts working for a large company called Transfield on power stations. And I think I got to know some of those people that he was working with. They were also Italians primarily. And as a consequence, I kind of was steered into the path of engineering and civil construction. I didn't have the capability of my father with my hands. I spent a lot of time in his workshop, but more playing cars than making anything. So it was probably from my father. And I can remember very clearly one day in year 12 where I made the decision that I was going to go into civil engineering, and I was going to join Transfield when I finished. And so that's how it panned out. Very rarely does life pan out the way that you kind of envisage it when you're a teenager, but it turned out that I got it right, so to speak.
Obviously, you're one thing I love is hearing those sort of immigrant stories to some extent, and there's something about immigrants taking risks as well. You know, you mentioned your father's traveled to the other side of the world. He ended up starting his own business. You know, there's a real work ethic there. Was work ethic something that was instilled to you from a young age, Andrew?
I think very much so. My father was from the Friuli area of Italy, northeast Italy, and in Italian culture and circles, Friulani are known as being hard workers. And certainly that was my father. And in terms of the decision to come to Australia, he was actually on his way to Switzerland for work. This is, again, in the 50s. He'd done his military service. And a friend of his said, "Oh, don't go to Italy. My sister lives in Australia. I'm going to Australia. Why don't you come with me?" And so he did. He got off the ship at Fremantle, took one look around and said, "I'm not staying here," got back on and ended up in Melbourne. But I said to him in the last year of his life, did you do the right thing to come to Australia? Because every time I went to Italy, I said, "Gee, why did you leave? Why would you leave this place? This is amazing." But he said, he looked at his hands and he said to me, "I could never have achieved in Italy what I've achieved in Australia." He said, "In Italy, they look down on me because I use my hands, or they look down on me because I use my hands. In Australia, they look up to me." Yes. And I think he loved Australia. He was always Italian, and he instilled certain elements of Italian culture in my brother and sister and myself, but he loved Australia, and he never wanted to go back ever in terms of living. And Australia gave great opportunities. And in my view, Australia still gives great opportunities, perhaps even more than what it used to do, particularly in construction.
Without a doubt. I resonate with that so much, Andrew, with regards to opportunity, because, if I was to stay in Ireland, or many of my friends and peer group that work in the civil engineering, it could take them 20 years, what could possibly take 5 years in Australia, just the exposure to the vast, size of projects and the challenges that they're likely to experience. I can resonate with that specifically. And when you decided that you want to go and study civil engineering, so did you go through the traditional route of going to university and that respect, Andrew?
Yeah, that decision, I was going to be a dentist. Wow. I thought I was going to be a dentist, but I decided to be an engineer, and I won't go into the detail of that, but effectively what I always liked the idea of was to be paid to go to university. So I applied to that could happen back in the early 80s. So I applied to the Department of Main Roads and what is now Sydney Water, but back then was Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board. They had this big long name and this fancy office that I went down for an interview in early 81. And they offered me a cadetship, but their condition was you had to either do it as a part-time or over 7 years, or a sandwich course over 6 years, 3 years or 6 months at uni and then 6 months practical and do that. And I came back and said to my father, I said, "What should I do?" Because I really wanted to go to uni full time. and I really wanted to go to the University of Sydney. I liked the atmosphere, I liked the architecture, I liked the reputation of Sydney University. And my father made a very wise thing. He said, call Claudio, who was the boss of Transfield, where my father was subcontracting at a Raring power station. And so I rang Claudio up and he said, look, I explained my situation and my quandary. And he said, look, you're better off doing 4 years full-time, major in structural, and don't compare yourself after 4 years when you leave, but look at yourself 6 years and compared to a sandwich course. And I guarantee you will be more experienced, you'll be paid more, you'll have higher responsibility. And then he said, by the way, the best thing, you can come and work for us over Christmas, because full-time uni is really 9 months on and 3 months off. So I kind of did a mini sandwich and graduated after 4 years and went and worked. Claudio was true to his word. And I used to be known as Bruno. My father's name was Bruno. I used to be known as Bruno's son when I first started. And a few years later, my father became Andrew's father. I stood on my own 2 feet, so to speak. Yeah. But that's how I decided to follow the traditional path, and it was the right path for me anyway. It's not always for everybody, but for me it was the right path. Made great friends at uni, and it was a really good spirit and atmosphere, and that set me on my way, so to speak.
Right, guys, so I'm absolutely pumped to say the Takeoff podcast is proud to be sponsored by RIB Software, the company behind some of the leading estimating software in the entire planet, including Costex, Candy, CX, and more. So firstly, if you didn't know, RIB are a powerhouse at providing innovative software solutions to the construction and engineering markets. They have over 500,000 users globally and are known universally as a solution provider for your entire project lifecycle, from planning to construction and beyond. RIB solutions help to ultimately connect people, processes, and data, so your project comes within budget, on time, and to the quality desired, all whilst reducing your business's carbon footprint. All this stuff matters, and RIB has the solutions. So if you're interested in finding out more, get on over to rib-software.com, reach out to your local team and quote Takeoff Podcast. For every listener who buys a subscription of RIB Costex, they will provide 1 free online training course. Okay, guys, back to the episode. University is something at the moment that there seems to be a lot of backlash against, because obviously the high price of fees, people coming out of university and maybe, you're graduating one of 100, 200 from a year group. What did you get from university? You mentioned some of those. You mentioned obviously the beautiful architecture, the people that you built relationships with. What did you typically find that you took from university mostly?
Well, there were a couple of things. Firstly, I didn't have any fees. The only fees we had to pay were the student union, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, were around $166. So it was truly a free education. And right. And that is, that is something that I'm forever grateful for. I think lifestyle, I grew up on the Central Coast and, coming to Sydney, living in the inner city, being exposed to, because it's not just about engineering students, you've been exposed to a whole range of different people. That was the new wave movement in the early 80s. A lot of people won't know what that means, but it was just another phase of fashion, music, and, of course, inner Sydney was very artistic. My family were traditionally artistic. I was the only one that wasn't, so I could appreciate it without being creative myself. So I think it was really a great 4 years living in Glebe and Newtown in the inner city, and set me up with, as far as independence and learning what life is about. It's not just about the education in terms of the theory of the course. It's about being able to stand on your own 2 feet. I started when I was 17 and finished when I was 21. So it was a very formative time, like it is for anybody. And it really worked for me. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but it really worked for me.
No, I love that. My favorite genre of films are coming of age films. You know, those I guess, as you said, the formative years of when you find out who you are, what you want to be in life. You know, those are things that really inspire me. With regards to when you graduated, when you moved into your first sort of projects, what were you first exposed to, Andrew, in terms of the type of projects and those demands that were put onto you from an early stage?
Well, it's in today's context, I'm one of the bad guys because I was constructing coal-fired power stations. In my first role as a student was at a Raring power station, but when I graduated, I was up at Bayswater Power Station doing boiler erection. So, you obviously start at the bottom, and I was doing a bit of civil engineering, a bit of suspended slabs and whatever. But in the end, I became what was called a section engineer, looking after boiler erection, reporting to a project engineer. But after about 6 months, when they sent me from kind of giving me a bit more responsibility, my boss at the time, Dennis Fonseca, I had 52 direct workforce, 2 leading hands, and a superintendent that used to come over twice a day. So I can't tell you how much I learnt from those 2 leading hands, being Corrado Bellesi and Vic Tonelli, and how much they taught me about, I guess you'd call it managing people, managing crews, working efficiently, safety, quality, all of those elements. There was all stuff that my engineering degree didn't give me in terms of a learning, but it was that practical, I guess you'd call it, opportunity to make mistakes, to understand what it means to lead 52 workforce and have them work efficiently and safely. It was an incredible responsibility, and one which I think, again, was formative for my future and helped me. So we were doing a lot of welding, a lot of steel erection, a combination of structural steel and mechanical components, high-pressure welding, a lot of metallurgy, all of that kind of stuff. Stuff that taught me really well and put me in good stead for the future, and to sequence work so that you could be I mean, we never worked on the western side of the boiler in August, for example, because that was when the westerly winds came and you'd have poor quality welding. So you'd work on the eastern side in that month. Little things like that, which don't mean a hill of beans to anybody, but they're just little things that that you learn.
Well, one of the things I love that you mentioned there was the relationship that you built with the leading hands, Andrew, because I often find that that's very much the case, for many sort of engineers or construction managers, coming out of university, and then they everything's brand new and fresh, and it's maybe that connection that you build with that leading hand or site manager or site foreman. That's nearly one of the most important, as you said, formative maybe relationships that you build in your career, because they're nearly like an encyclopedia of knowledge. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. I think every time you face adversity or a challenge, even today, very often the solution is with the team that you're working with. And, the artisans and workforce have got tremendous knowledge and experience and understanding of the task, and they want to do a good job as well. So it worked later on. I had a particular issue working inside the pylon of the harbour bridge. We had to, if you can imagine, the north pylons of the harbour bridge are actually, we hollowed them out and removed about 1,000 cubic metres of concrete from inside so that they became the exhaust shafts for the Sydney Harbour Tunnel. And we had one access, which was a bit bigger than was a big roller door, and we had to work underground to excavate 2 large 8 metre by 8 metre tunnels to come in, to bring the exhaust air in. We had to build plenum slabs, and then we had to demolish up the top. And I just looked at the program and said, how are we going to do this? Well, it was the people that I worked with. We changed the methods. We changed the sequence. We got a change in design, but it came from the superintendent, the workforce, the foreman. This is how we're going to build this job safely. We didn't have a BIM model or a federated model that we could play around with. We were way before those times. But knowing the names of people is really important. Knowing the name of my crews that I was working in, and even later, building relationships, how you going, what's your family like. Don't just be focused on tasks, but get to know your workforce and the supervisors and the people that I work with, because invariably that builds rapport, it builds relationship, and it builds that, one team approach that we used to have a saying in transfer, I think it went something like, in transfer we can do the impossible straight away. A miracle takes a little longer. But it came from that self-belief and that sense that we were all part. Didn't matter what our title was, we're all part of the project and we're all in this together. And I've never lost that. My father wore a blue shirt to work every day, and I have the greatest respect for people that work at the excavation facing tunnelling, or the inverted commas coalface, because they're the people that really do the job. And we must always remember that everything we do as leaders is in service of making their life as easy and as safe and consistent as possible and efficient as possible. So it's a bit off track on your question, but it's the principle is the team invariably knows what the answer is to a problem. It's not always that you have to go external or off-site. Invariably, the solution lies within, and my role is to extract that solution from the team and provide an environment where people feel like they can contribute.
So you touched on something there, Andrew, obviously, that at that stage in your career, you mentioned maybe that's the 80s or the 90s, where people you're forced to come together and listen and talk out and collaborate. Do you think that's something that is potentially missing in today's terms, or maybe replacing some of that with technology? What do you think maybe the evolution of that has been like?
Well, look, I think, construction has changed a lot over the decades, as you can imagine. And I'm not here to give a history lesson, but I think projects have become bigger, they've become more complex. In those early days, we were often construct only. We weren't design and construct. We weren't ever responsible for looking after the community, or the environmental compliance was less regulatory, less sophisticated. So winding forward to today, those elements still are important. We are still a people business. All of our people matter. Acciona or any other construction company is 85% people. It's probably 10% plant and equipment or something like that, and maybe 5-10% systems. Applying technology is important. The tools that we have help us keep up with the additional complexity that we have to provide, the sophistication of the solutions. But the people element is still there. So I've never gone away from that. I sometimes feel a bit of a cheat, because I'm just regurgitating what I learnt in the 80s and 90s about relating to people, or an organisation structure that is consistent with how we used to do things, in terms of, not having too much. I don't like micromanagement. I don't like having too many people reporting to me. So I kind of break it down into smaller groups, and then allowing those groups to go and do their job. But they have to be working together in terms of the communication. Communication is key. And I think what we used to do, verbally back then, we now can do through other means, such as Teams meetings or obviously email, which is an imprecise form of communication. But definitely that face-to-face relationship is the key to delivering great projects still. And for me, it's also putting away ego, arrogance, hubris, all of those dark sides of a human personality that we all possess, that I possess to some degree, to be humble, to be listening, to be interested, to understand that the answer to a problem can come from anywhere. It's not I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I don't have to be the know-it-all. I'm not anyway. But allowing other people to flourish in an environment where they feel safe to speak their mind. And, there's no kind of off-limit type conversations, because my role is to extract the best out of the vast talent that, we have at our disposal in our teams. As project teams get more diverse, more inclusive, more integrated, I need to ensure that I provide an environment where people feel safe to speak and are listened to. It doesn't always work. I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but those kind of principles that I learned early on, I still apply today in a different dynamic.
Yeah. Well, was this something that you learned, Andrew, over time, about this sort of building this open, collaborative dynamic, or was this something that you knew from the beginning?
Oh, I definitely didn't know it from the beginning. It's definitely learnt. I learnt it from people that I worked with. My key mentor was a gentleman by the name of Claudio, who was the project director. It wasn't called project director back then, probably project manager on those coal-fired power stations that I worked on Sydney Harbour Tunnel, and later New Southern Rail, Dennis Fonseca again. They were all very hands-on. You would go into Claudio's desk, there wouldn't be a sheet of paper on his desk. We didn't have computers then. It would all be about the conversation, the importance of the conversation. And if you don't mind me, I'll recall a particular story, if you like.
Yeah, please do.
That to me was quite pivotal. So we're going back to March of 1997. I was working on a section of the New Southern Rail, which is the main railway tunnel from the airport in Sydney into the city. It was a project that needed to be open for the Olympics, which were held in 2000. So I was looking after the easy part, which was the excavation of the rock tunnel at the northern end in Sydney sandstone using road headers. And the hard part was the soft ground tunnel, which was a large diameter slurry shield TBM going through alluvial, soft ground, water charged, all the difficulties you can imagine. And Claudio rang me up and said, come to my office. This was late in the afternoon. He said, tomorrow morning, you're going to replace effectively my boss at the time. I'm going to insert you in as construction manager for both tunnels. And we had a joint venture partner called Bouygues, who were specialists in soft ground tunnelling, and they were all French, as you can imagine. And I was to look after these very, very smart, knowledgeable, technical specialists. And I said to Claudio, I have no idea about soft ground tunnelling. Why are you putting me there? And I was 32 at the time. And he said, don't worry. He said, you're the right person. You've got the right leadership traits. And he said then something very important. He said, I will always be here. You can call me at any time. You are the person that will lead that project If you need anything, give me a call. And so when you're feeling not confident and you're feeling like inadequate and an imposter, if you like, why? You know, I don't know anything about soft ground tunnels, but your boss tells you that I trust you and believe in yourself and you've got the right attributes as a leader. It's not so much my technical capability, it was my leadership that he was saying to me. And a few years earlier, I'd been working on some offshore oil platforms for Exxon, Esso, BHP. We cast them in a casting basin in Port Kembla, and they were to be towed out to Bass Strait. Again, not good from today's standards. It was oil, but Exxon brought in a number of Americans, and there was a guy there who was an ex-Marine in the Gulf War, and he'd led, I think, something like 100 Marines into the Gulf War on on a ship or something. And he came into my office one night. He said, "I've looked around here, Andrew." He'd been on the job maybe a month or two. He said, "And I've decided that," he was from the client, he said, "I've decided that you're the only one around here that's got any leadership capability." And I was even younger then. So it kind of like, if people think you've got leadership capabilities, then you kind of go with it, you know, and just do it. And then since that time, we're now, 25, 30 years on, I've kind of realised what Dave and Claudio were talking about. And so I try and impart that concept onto my team.
What do you think that
long way of answering the question, but
no, it's perfect, Andrew. What do you think that they identified in you of that effectively give them the confidence to pass on the torch, so to speak?
Look, it's hard to describe what leadership is. I think I've learned a little bit later of through courses that I've done, some of the technology around leadership, but that back then I didn't have that technology. I think particularly it was about taking on responsibility and not, when adversity strikes, not shying away from it. Kind of like, we're going to overcome this. We might have had a few because invariably in construction, you've got to manage time, you've got to manage cost, you've got to manage safety and quality. And if something's not going right, often program gets affected, but invariably the whole lot can get caught up in that. And when you're on critical paths for the opening of the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, or when I was on a critical path for the opening of the New Southern Rail for the Sydney Olympics, you learn about responsibility. And you can either, I guess, choose. You always have a choice. I always had a choice. My choice was to embrace the challenge.
Guys, I'm interrupting this podcast today to give you some information as to what I actually do every single day. So I own and operate a business called Getting Executive Recruitment. We're a specialist boutique recruitment company, and we specialise purely in the pre-construction and commercial construction markets globally. We're really well known and respected for our work in estimating, cost management, quantity surveying, and contract administration. Because we're hyper niche, we don't have millions of candidates. We don't really even have thousands, but more times than not, we have the right candidate for the right job at the right time. Unlike a lot of recruitment agents out there, we are super experienced in what we do. We understand the market, we understand what makes our clients tick and our candidates tick too. Each and every single assignment we work on undergoes an extensive executive search process. It's robust and it works 100% of the time. We've also got a team of 5 researchers who map our markets out globally within our niche. They're amazing. They allow us to work fast, which saves our clients time and money too. So if you're interested in our process, drop us a message. Now back to the episode.
And I equally knew that I couldn't do it on my own. It was impossible to do it on my own. It wasn't about me, it was about the team. So leading a team, selecting the right people, working with the right people to, inspire the team to achieve. And I was part of that. It was leading by example, or being there in the mix, not going off and telling people, to do their job. It was, I'm doing it too kind of thing.
Yeah.
working double shift or splitting over shift so that others that would do the same, that leading by example, not expecting people to do something that I wasn't prepared to do myself.
Do as I do, not as I say, so to speak.
Very much so, which I think is in the Australian psyche as well. It kind of suits, and I suspect it suits the Irish psyche as well. There's a lot of similarities, in my opinion, between the two cultures in that we get in and we do it together. There's no elitism or no one's better than the other person. Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of leadership, at least in this country, at least in construction.
Big part of leadership is developing and building teams. Andrew, how have you mentioned something a little bit earlier about building sort of small reporting structures, not having too many people reporting into someone. What are the typical things that you do when you're looking to build a team?
Well, I think, and this project is a case in point, that my span is usually limited to about 8 people. Some project directors will have, 12 people reporting to them. I limit it down to 8, but picking those 8 key people across the various disciplines, obviously there's safety and finance and commercial and those kind of areas, but particularly that concept of first follower. If you've ever seen that video of the guy that gets up and dances in the crowd and looks a bit geeky, and then the guy comes along, and that kind of concept of the first follower. So I always have to have somebody that from the outset we build together. That's something that I've learned. I didn't necessarily have that 30 years ago, but certainly more recently, both this project and my previous project, WestConnex 3A, which was a $3.3 billion tunnel project. I had a first follower there in Manu. We worked like a hand in glove. And here I've got Tim. We work hand in glove. And together we develop the team and we identify the key leadership roles. And then once we've got those people on board, we let them build their team. And there's times where we give guidance and, it should be this person or that person, but generally empower my leadership team to select their team and go from there, so that there's that ownership and I don't micromanage down into the detail. I'm there if needed, but I don't do it out of habit. But that first team is really important.
You mentioned obviously about building teams and managing teams. Obviously, a big part of working in sort of larger corporations is managing upwards as well. Andrew, how have you maybe dealt with that in the past? What sort of learnings have you sort of taken away from your career managing upwards?
That's a very good question, Mick. This particular project that I'm on has the great advantage that we're Acciona 100%. Yeah. But we are working in partnership with Transport for New South Wales in what's called an incentivised target cost model. So I'm very well aware of my equivalent in transport and his leadership team that he has to report to, and of course my leadership team. So getting to know the leadership teams above and getting to understand what are the drivers in transport and how we can meld together. So good communication is really a big part of that. If I go back to the previous project that I was on, it was a 3-partner joint venture. It was Acciona, Samsung and Bouygues. So 3 different cultures, 3 different parts of the world. When you look at, there's a lovely paper by Duffield and Ryan that was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, and it studied all of the mega projects in Australia and at the time, and I think all but one of them lost money and some of them lost $1 gazillion. And Duffield and Ryan came up with about 6 or 8 core areas that they had, these projects had in common where they didn't do well. And one of them was joint venture politics. So I've worked in about 8 or 9 joint ventures over my career. And the key thing is to do everything that I possibly could to keep the joint venture together, to keep the partners working together on a best for project basis, and always put the project first ahead of parent company requirements. And that is a key element, in my opinion, of delivering projects successfully, along with all the other things that go together, with that. But in joint ventures and managing upwards, keeping all equally informed, not playing favourites, putting a lot of facts down, making fact-based decisions that are best for the project. It's a bit corny and obvious, but putting it into practice when there's different strong personalities or different cultures at play, it takes a lot of time and effort as a leader to ensure that consistency over years, because these projects go 4 or 5 years. And I'm not saying that I get it right all the time, but those dynamics around leadership of companies in the joint venture and having strong relationships and giving facts, really important.
Some great points in there, Andrew. One of the things that I've done over 130 episodes with different leaders from the construction, civil engineering industries, mining industries. Communication seems to be just so important. It just seems to be the foundation of everything that we do from a project management perspective. Would you agree with that?
1000%. And again, it's not something that I was necessarily taught at university. It wasn't something that I was taught in my degree. I would hope that it is being taught. A lot of people talk about STEM, and I've heard it from others. STEM plus C, STEM plus communication, and I think the advantage that we have now with more women coming into our projects and a lot of people from different backgrounds, this kind of macho, do as I'd say kind of approach doesn't work. People want to know the why. So the role of the leader is to provide context, to answer the why question and do it over and over again to remind people about why we need to do it this way, or why is this important, or what's the bigger picture here and how do we fit into that? Because, we're invariably in companies and in joint ventures and on projects, we're part of a wider ecosystem, a global ecosystem at a company or a delivery level. So communication across all realms is critical. And for a leader, that is invariably about listening. It's not about talking. It's about listening and giving opportunity for people to speak and to speak their mind freely, so that we can, or I can, or we can as a leadership team come up with what's the right path forward, or follow this way versus that way, or when we're weighing up the pros and cons of anything. The groupthink is death. Diverse views and that full range of views, and that comes from people being okay to be the one person out, if you get what I mean.
No,
because that one person out might actually be the pathway forward. So communication is everything.
I heard a quote recently about great leaders work for their teams rather than the teams work for their leader, where a great leader is thinking about how they can support their team, rather than thinking how I can extract so much out of them, if that makes sense.
Is that analogy of take the organisation structure, which is this peak and I'm at the top, wow, how good am I? Nah, turn it upside down. And I'm supporting the whole operation, and our leadership team is supporting. And it goes back to what I was saying before about everything we do is in service of the people at the workface or in the design team or in the functional areas, that they know what they need to do. They're given consistent boundaries or ways of working, and they know what they're doing. They can be the most efficient on every single day. And that's often about safety standards, work standards, provide quality. If you make a decision for safety or for quality it will be supported no matter what. I often say the worst thing anyone can do is make no decision.
Yeah.
You make a decision, I back you. If it was the wrong decision, then learn from it, because we all make mistakes. So I kind of do it the other way, which I think I pictorially think of myself as supporting the team, not the guy at the top. That doesn't fit with who I am.
I love that mindset and methodology and way of thinking, Andrew. Moving on to sort of today's market, how do you see the industry today? What sort of challenges do you see we're sort of facing as an industry?
Well, I think the core challenges are still there, which is about diversification of, in particular, gender diversification. I think I've only ever had one female boss in I think I've been doing this including as a student for 43 years, mm-hmm. and that's not good enough, quite frankly. We're always trying to encourage women into our industry, and yet we make it so hard because of the demanding hours. There's lots of demands on all people in our industry. It's a tough gig. Projects can take 5, 6, 7, 8 years to be approved, and then everybody wants them built in a year or in 2 years. And there's always that time pressure and that risk. There's a lot of risk allocation to contractors. So I think evening out the risk, getting more diversity, more gender diversity, genuinely looking for leaders rather than engineers to run projects, because it's not always about just because I've got a degree in engineering, I'm the right person to lead a project, because, you can support, you have strong technical specialists, but leadership isn't confined to engineering. So I think broadening our view of what a leader is, and I think it's a big challenge, because human capital is the biggest risk in construction, and particularly, I'm not quite sure what it's like in New Zealand, but certainly in Australia, with capital being invested in renewable energy, a lot of those projects aren't in cities. They're in regional parts of Australia where the sun shines or where transmission lines need to go, and we still need a lot of people. So the industry is moving from, say, doing a lot of road tunnels, in my case, to renewable energy, and we need to be able to attract all types of people to those projects. That human capital is critical, and we've got to make our projects more inclusive, more open to different methods. Life is complex. You mentioned before about COVID. What COVID taught us is that we can do things differently in terms of the way in which we work and deliver, and we need to adopt some of those measures as a normal part of what we deliver in order to be able to attract and retain the best people. I think the industry is facing a number of challenges as it morphs into this renewable phase, and how do we deliver the standard of living? How do we look after the planet? How do we become more sustainable, reduce our carbon footprint? These are all immense questions that didn't exist when I started, and they haven't been answered yet. But the construction industry has a role to play, because people are continuing to look for a better lifestyle and better ways of doing things, and we have a role to play. I don't know what the answer is personally, but I know it involves being inclusive and focusing on people and technology, and not being set in our ways, constantly feeling our way forward for new ways of doing things, new technologies, recycled materials, different uses of resources that we've got. they're big challenges, but we're up to it as well as an industry, particularly because the need is there and society demands it. So it's a great opportunity for young ideas and new ways of doing things and not being trapped in our old ways.
I think that's an amazing way to sort of finish the show, Andrew. Just the innovation that's required to move forward, the out of the box thinking, the ability to accept some of these ideas, as you say, fail forward. You know, there's so much of what you mentioned there resonates with me. You know, and I think will resonate with our listeners. As I mentioned off the show, a lot of the listeners of the show would be in that sort of intermediate level of their career, maybe in their mid-20s, the mid-30s. You know, what's one piece of advice you would give right now for someone actually at that stage of their career?
Well, I think it's a wonderful stage of your career to be in. And it would be lovely for me to wind back the clock to that period. The construction industry for me has provided tremendous fulfillment and challenge, and I'm so grateful for the variety of projects that I've worked on and for the different people that I've worked with. And I think for someone in the middle of their career, stick with construction, go where people want you to go. Obviously, you've got to fit that in with personal challenges and your personal life, but if somebody thinks that you're capable of doing something, then believe them because they see something in you that perhaps you don't see. And this industry will give you great reward. The projects that you work on will stay with you for the rest of your life. If you have children and grandchildren, you'll be telling them about that. You'll be boring them to tears, maybe.
Yeah.
But it will give a sense of challenge. You know, I often look at people in the financial or the legal industry. What have they got to show for their endeavour?
Yeah.
There might be a spreadsheet or a contract. We've got these marvellous projects that will be around for hundreds of years, many of them. And to be part of that, it's a great reward. So stick with the industry, speak up. Never allow yourself to be shut down. If you find yourself that no one's listening, well, maybe that's a time to move on somewhere else where you can be listened to. And particularly if you're young and inexperienced, you deserve to be listened to as much as anybody else because people listened to me when I was young. They allowed me to speak and they allowed me to fail and learn or make mistakes and learn. And that's what this industry can afford, and that's what this industry should encourage. Obviously, we don't want people making mistakes all the time. I'm not saying that. But allowing to learn and grow. And so stick with it. It's a marvellous industry. It's hard. It definitely is hard. It's particularly when we're responsible for weather and all those things that we have no control over. But the camaraderie, the friendships, the relationships, the different projects that you will work on, they mean something. They mean something to society and they mean something personally.
I couldn't have said it any better, Andrew. I actually wrote a post today on LinkedIn about how important construction is, about how we build hospitals, how we build roads, how we build tunnels, how we build the lifestyle for people. You know, without construction, without engineering, we would have nothing, you know, and I think it's the most dynamic, interesting industry in the world. And you mentioned about finance and even technology to some extent. You know, you see a lot of these startups that really don't go anywhere, or a piece of technology that might make your life a second easier, you know. But when you look at these marvelous pieces of these buildings and these pieces of infrastructure, I think it's an incredible industry. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being part of the show. I could probably speak to you for 2 more hours. You know, I've learned so much today. And, you know, thank you so much for sharing your story on the Takeoff podcast.
You're welcome, Mick. And maybe if I could just extend a little bit and say one thing, because I think you've touched on something really important there, if you don't mind. I come from a civil engineering background, so of course my focus on that. But as you rightly said, buildings, hospitals, education, all of those types of telecommunications are all equally critical. And the thing to do, in my opinion, is to embrace technology, automation, robotics, innovation. So some of those startup companies, there'll be kernels of ideas that will develop and grow, and we need to allow those opportunities. So thank you once again for your time, and have a great day.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before you go today, guys, I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. Can you please go to Apple right now or Spotify right now and just give us those 5 stars? Hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference you wouldn't believe. The whole idea of this show is to inspire, educate and motivate our listeners. And we can only do that if we're getting the best guests. The best guests want to see data. They want to see information. They want to see how many listeners that we get. And so all of this stuff is really, really important. So if you can just literally go and do that today, if you enjoy the show, just go and hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We're going to continue to push this out there every Monday. So if you can, hit that 5-star button. And if you can't, even share it with a friend. Go on to WhatsApp, flick it on to your crew. Guys, thank you so much for listening. On to next week.